everyone, you know what today is, right? World Backup Day. It's like the internet's annual reminder to double-check if our digital lives are actually safe. And, well, that makes it the perfect day to jump into a deep dive on a backup strategy that might sound good initially, especially for those running a home lab or a smaller IT setup.
Yeah.
But it could end up being kind of like building a house on, well, let's just say not the most stable ground.
Exactly. We're going to be looking at what happens when you try to run Proxmox Backup Server, PBS for short, inside a virtual machine.
Right, in a VM.
Now, at first glance, you might think, hey, VMs, they're flexible, easy to manage, everything's nice and tidy.
Keep it all contained, yeah.
But what we're going to uncover today is why that sense of comfort could actually turn out to be a pretty big risk.
A trap, almost.
Yeah.
So today, especially since it's World Backup Day, we're on a mission to dig deep into why using PBS in a VM, especially if it's on the same Proxmox VE host that's backing up, could be a lot less secure than you think. We've been checking out some recent discussions online, and let me tell you, some of the things people are saying are pretty eye-opening.
It can get intense.
No, while virtualizing PBS definitely has its appeal, easy to set up, flexible,
Yeah, you get it.
we can't ignore the big elephant in the room. This setup could be a recipe for disaster.
Oh, absolutely. And, on a day like World Backup Day, it's not just about checking off that you have backups.
Right.
It's about making sure those backups are going to work when everything else goes wrong.
When you actually need them.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going deep into those risks today, talking about scenarios where you might not be able to recover your data at all.
Oh, wow.
We'll untangle the messy web of dependencies that can trip you up, and ultimately look at why your backup system might fail you at the worst possible moment.
When you need it most.
Exactly. If you care about your data, and I know you do,
Yeah.
this is a conversation you need to be part of.
Let's get right to it.
Let's do it.
One of the biggest red flags that keeps coming up is this idea of the illusion of redundancy. Yeah.
There's this analogy that really drives it home for me. It's like, imagine locking your spare car keys inside your car.
Oh, I've done that.
Because you think, oh, they'll be extra safe in there.
Makes sense at the time.
But wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense at all.
No, not at all.
And that's exactly the flawed logic we see when people run PBS in a VM on that same Proxmox VE host it's supposed to be backing up.
You're putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly, one basket.
You're creating what we call a single point of failure.
Right.
If that host kicks the bucket, your data's gone, and so is the way to get it back.
The backups are gone too.
Gone.
So let's say your main system crashes, hardware failure, power surge, whatever.
Happens all the time.
Your precious data vanishes, and the backup system you thought would save you? Poof. It's gone too because it was living on that same machine.
It's like they disappear together.
Vanish into thin air.
It's not true redundancy. It's just delaying the inevitable moment you realize, oh, I can't get to my backups when a real crisis hits. You've just made it harder to get your data back.
Exactly.
You're stuck trying to fix the failed host first before you can even think about restoring anything.
Which might not even be possible depending on what happened.
Right, and that's if you're lucky. Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
Many people think of PBS as this lightweight, set it and forget it kind of thing.
Yeah, it's pretty low-key during normal use.
Doesn't use much resources. That's the assumption, at least.
Right, but here's the thing.
Okay.
The magic of PBS, the thing that makes it so powerful, is its deduplication feature.
Deduplication, what is that?
It's this awesome feature that saves you a ton of storage space.
Okay.
But it's not exactly a free lunch.
Yeah.
Deduplication is a process that can really put a strain on your system's resources.
Really? So it's not as lightweight as we think?
Not when it's working hard.
I see. So how does it put a strain on the system?
Well, it eats up a lot of CPU power, and it generates a ton of I/O activity that's all the reading and writing of data to your storage devices.
Oh.
And if that gets out of hand, it can bog down your whole system.
So it's not just sitting there quietly in the background?
No, not always.
Okay, so now let's imagine you've got PBS running in a VM, and it's competing for those same CPU cycles and disk I/O with all your other VMs.
Yeah.
Some of which might be pretty resource hungry themselves.
Oh, yeah, especially if you're running a bunch of stuff.
What happens then?
Well, your backups are going to slow down. They might take forever to finish.
Okay.
But here's the real kicker. When disaster strikes and you need to restore your data, that's the whole point of backups, right?
That's why we're here.
That process could become unbelievably slow, maybe even fail completely.
Oh, no.
Because that poor little PBS VM just can't get the resources it needs to do its job.
It's being starved out.
basically.
And as we keep saying, World Backup Day is about making sure those backups are actually there for you when things go south.
When you need them most.
You don't want to be stuck waiting for hours, days even, while your data is in limbo.
Nobody wants that.
Okay, so we've talked about the illusion of redundancy, the potential for slowdowns.
Right.
But let's talk about how PBS interacts with storage.
Oh, yeah.
And specifically something we've seen discussed a lot online, running ZFS inside of virtualized PBS.
ZFS is a really interesting one. It's a fantastic file system. So many features.
It sounds almost purpose-built for backups.
It's got these built-in safeguards like snapshots. It does data integrity checks to make sure your data hasn't been corrupted.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's got replication built right in. It's like the ideal candidate for a backup server.
So it's got all the right stuff, but what's the catch? There's got to be a catch, right?
There's always a catch.
Okay.
ZFS is amazing, but it needs direct access to the physical disks to really shine.
No middleman.
Exactly. It wants to be in control.
Okay, so what happens when we put ZFS inside a VM?
Well, you're essentially adding a middleman, the hypervisor.
That layer between the VM and the actual hardware.
Right. It gets in the way.
So how does that affect ZFS?
It introduces latency, delays, and it can make your storage setup more fragile.
More prone to errors.
Potentially. Because you're adding an extra layer, an extra point where things can go wrong.
So CFS loses some of its power when it's stuck in a VM.
Exactly. It can't fully utilize its strengths.
What about using passthrough to give the VM direct disk access? We've seen that mentioned online.
Passthrough can work, but it adds a whole other layer of complexity.
It defeats the purpose of using a VM in the first place.
Right. You wanted things to be simple and easy to manage.
But now you're managing hardware within a virtual environment. It's like trying to simplify things by making them more complicated.
You got it.
And this brings up a really important point. There's a huge difference between how well a system runs when everything's fine,
Day-to-day operations.
and how well it can handle a real crisis.
When everything hits the fan.
We see people say all the time, oh, my virtualized PBS has been working perfectly for months.
Yeah, it's the classic, it works for me argument.
But that's not the real test. The question is, what happens when things go really wrong? And especially on World Backup Day, we need to think about the worst case scenario.
Absolutely.
So imagine this. Your main Proxmox host has a major problem, corrupted file system, kernel panic, whatever.
A power surge.
The whole system is down, offline.
Kaput.
And guess what? Your virtualized PBS is down too because it was living on that same host.
They go down together.
You're in a panic, you need to get your data back, and the tool you are relying on is completely useless.
You're stuck.
You might spend hours, days trying to recover your data using complicated workarounds.
It's a nightmare scenario.
But if PBS was running on a separate machine, you'd be in a much better position.
They'd be better.
You could start restoring your data right away.
That's the peace of mind you want, especially on World Backup Day.
Exactly. So let's talk about alternatives, because running PBS on separate hardware doesn't have to break the bank.
It really doesn't. You can run PBS bare metal on pretty modest hardware.
You don't need the latest and greatest.
Not at all. You can repurpose an old mini PC.
I have a few of those lying around.
Or use a low-power Intel NUC.
Those are pretty compact.
Or even explore some of the more powerful Raspberry Pi alternatives.
You can make a pretty capable backup server without spending a fortune.
For most home and small office needs, it's more than enough.
So what about LXC containers? We've seen those mentioned as well.
LXC containers are a great option too. They're lighter than full VMs because they share the host's operating system.
Okay.
And you can use bind mounts to give them direct access to your storage.
So they get the performance benefits of bare metal without the full overhead of a VM.
Exactly.
The key takeaway here is there are good ways, often more affordable ways, to have reliable backups without the risks of a VM on the same host.
It's about choosing the right tool for the job.
Speaking of risks, let's talk about cluster dependency.
Okay, cluster dependency.
If you choose to run your PBS VM within the same Proxmox cluster, it's backing up.
You're walking into a minefield.
You're essentially creating a single point of failure for your entire cluster.
And for your backups.
Proxmox clusters rely on this concept called quorum.
Quorum is like a majority vote.
The nodes in the cluster need to agree on things to function properly.
And they rely on shared storage and a healthy network connection between them.
So if something goes wrong at the cluster level, a bad software update, a network glitch, a problem with the shared storage,
the whole cluster could go down.
and that includes your PBS VM, which is supposed to be your safety net.
It's ironic.
The more complex your setup, the more vulnerable it becomes if your backups aren't properly isolated.
It's like a house of cards.
Now, some people might say, well, I'm running my PBS VM on a different host.
Yeah, like a separate Proxmox server or a NAS.
But even then, you're still relying on that host's resources.
You're still dependent on that host's disk performance, its RAM, its virtualization layer.
It can still become a bottleneck, especially when you need to do a restore.
Exactly. And you're still violating the spirit of the 3-2-1 backup rule.
3-2-1, remind us what that is.
3 copies of your data on 2 different types of storage media with 1 copy off-site.
If your PBS is running as a VM on the same infrastructure as your main systems, you're not really achieving that diversification.
You're just putting all your eggs in slightly different baskets, but they're still all in the same room.
You need that separation, that true independence.
That's what bare metal PBS gives you.
It's its own entity, not reliant on your main systems.
And speaking of World Backup Day, it's not just about having backups, it's about knowing you can restore them.
That's the real test.
Absolutely.
Have you actually tried doing a full restore from your PBS recently? Ideally to a separate machine?
It's a good exercise to do.
If you haven't, you don't really know if your backups are going to work when you need them.
You're just hoping for the best.
And if your PBS is running in a VM, the chances of something going wrong during a restore are much higher.
You're introducing unnecessary risk.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the main takeaway is this. While running Proxmox Backup Server in a VM might seem convenient, it comes with some serious risks.
Risks that could cost you your data?
We've talked about the illusion of redundancy, the performance bottlenecks, the complexities of ZFS in a VM,
The cluster dependency track.
and how a virtualized PBS can undermine the best practices of backup strategy.
We've covered a lot.
So on this World Backup Day, we encourage you to take a hard look at your backup setup.
Think about those single points of failure, the potential for slowdowns, the benefits of separation.
Here's a final thought for you. What's the one thing you could change today that would give you more confidence in your backups tomorrow?
A question worth asking.
Maybe dedicating a small, separate machine to run PBS bare metal.
It's something to consider.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into data safety.
We hope this has given you some food for thought.
And here's one last pro tip before you go. Imagine your main server has crashed. How would you restore from your PBS VM?
Good question.
Does that VM even boot if its host is gone? Just thinking about it can reveal potential weaknesses.
It's a good mental exercise.
Until next time, stay safe and make sure those backups are ready when you need them most. Take care, everyone.